There's a small country in the Balkans that holds one of Europe's oldest genetic secrets. But here's the twist. It doesn't appear in any ancient texts. No mention in Roman archives. None in Greek epics. Not even a whisper in early medieval chronicles. Albanians, one of the oldest genetically continuous populations in Europe, officially appear in history only around the 11th century. But when scientists sequenced their DNA, something broke. They found haplogroups like EV13, reaching back 8,000 years, tied to the first farmers of Europe. J2B, L283, the warrior gene of Bronze Age Illyrians, still common in northern Albania today. R1b, Z2103, a signature of Yamnaya steppe migrants, found in early burials at Sinamak, 2600 BC. These aren't fragments. These are direct lineages, passed father to son, generation after generation, without interruption. While empires invaded, religions changed, borders shifted, the blood stayed. How does a people leave behind no written record, but preserve the clearest genetic trail in the Balkans? Because their story wasn't written in ink. It was encrypted in chromosomes. Even maternal DNA tells the same tale. Haplogroup H12, rare in most of Europe, peaks among Albanians. It's been there since the Bronze Age. In both male and female lines, the same conclusion rises. Albanians didn't arrive late. They've been here since the beginning. And yet, history ignored them. Why? Was it geography? Isolation? Suppression? Or something deeper? Something intentional? Because now, tumulus graves across Kosovo and Shkrel are yielding ancient DNA that matches modern Albanians almost perfectly. Not similar. Not distant cousins. Direct ancestors. So if a person this old could vanish from the written record, what else did we erase? And what exactly are we about to find inside those graves? Let me show you. High in the Albanian highlands, under centuries of moss and silence, lie stone mounds built by the dead tumuli, burial hills, thousands of them. But these aren't random burials. They follow a strict pattern, warrior elites, arranged by rank, weapon, and bloodline. These are the graves of the Glasenac, Mati culture, spanning from 1600 to 300 BCE, a civilization once dismissed as peripheral, forgotten in textbooks, brushed off by historians. Until 2022. That's when genome sequencing from tumulus burials in Shkrel, Mat, and Sinamak exposed a genetic shockwave. The Y-DNA of these Iron Age warriors matches the dominant haplogroups still found in modern Albanians. Not fragments. Not distant cousins. The same. J2B, L283. Carried by half the warriors at Sinamak. Linked to elite Bronze Age chariot burials from the Sedna culture of the Adriatic coast. Now found, alive and well, in modern northern Albanians. EV13. Once thought to be spread by Roman soldiers, now confirmed in Bronze Age Balkan remains, long before Rome ever touched the region. It peaks today in Kosovo at nearly 40%. This isn't just a DNA match. It's a time capsule, passed down father to son for over 3,000 years. But the match isn't only genetic. In these tumuli, archaeologists found iron axes, belt buckles with sun symbols, and burial poses that echo through Albanian oral tradition. Warriors buried facing the rising sun, weapons in hand, just like in the northern Albanian epic songs. Every sword, every grave, every gene repeats. Science now says what myth always whispered. These weren't mythical Illyrians. These were real people. They're still here. And they weren't just surviving. They were organizing, expanding, building chiefdoms, forming warrior lineages, defending sacred passes. But that raises a deeper question. Because if the DNA matches, and the rituals survived, then who were these Bronze Age clans before they became the Illyrians? Where did they come from? What invisible force shaped these people? Not just in body, but in blood. And what do we find when we trace that blood even further back? To answer that, we have to go back. Not hundreds, but thousands of years before the first tumulus mound was ever built. To two worlds. Two bloodlines. Two migrations that collided to make one people. The first, Anatolian farmers, who crossed into the Balkans around 6,500 BC. They brought wheat, pottery, livestock, And something even more powerful: their genes. Autosomal DNA shows that these early settlers carried ancestry rooted in the northwestern Fertile Crescent, likely descending from the Catalhoyuk and Barsan Hoyuk communities. Their arrival wasn't just a demographic event, it was a revolution, the Neolithic Revolution, and their blood is still here. In modern Albanians, it makes up nearly 50% of the genome. That's not a theory. That's based on Lazaridis et al. 2017. Confirmed again by Matheson et al. 2018. But that's only half the story. Because around 3000 BCE, something thundered in from the east. The Yamnaya steppe herders, mounted on horses, carrying bronze weapons. And something else, a new language. Proto-Indo-European. They didn't replace the farmers. They merged with them. By the time of the Cinemac burial, dated around 2600 BCE, we already see the fusion. Roughly 70% steppe ancestry in a Balkan male skeleton, but buried in a local tumulus. His genome carried R1b, Z2103, but his rituals followed the farmer tradition. This wasn't conquest. This was integration. And that's the contradiction. Because while most of Europe blended and blurred over time, in Albania, the lines held. Two bloodlines, one rooted in the soil, the other in the saddle, fused early and never left. Even today, that same mix runs in Albanian veins. Ancient farmers and horse riders, sedentary and nomadic, peace and steel. So what does that make the modern Albanian? A mixture or a preservation? A crossroads or a stronghold? And that leads to a deeper mystery. Why did these bloodlines stay intact here when they vanished everywhere else? The answer isn't just in the DNA. It's in the terrain. Albania is more than a country. It's a fortress. Over 70% of its landscape is mountains, jagged, remote, almost untouched. Valleys like Faith and Kelman cut so deep they isolate entire communities for centuries. Roads didn't reach some villages until the late 20th century. And in those unreachable pockets, the genes didn't move either. Ancient DNA studies, including Lazaridis et al. 2022, show that Albanians have some of the highest levels of identity by descent IBD in Europe, a genetic fingerprint of people who've stayed local for generations, not isolated because they were forgotten, but because they chose to remain. While Slavic migration swept across the Balkans after 600 CE, and while Ottoman routes carved their way through the lowlands in the 15th century, the mountains stood still. Empires passed around them. Languages shifted around them. Borders were redrawn around them. But inside, the blood held its ground. Even the customs survived. In the highlands of northern Albania, the canon of Leke Dukagini governed life for over 500 years. A strict, oral code, passed not through writing, but memory. And here's the twist. Many of its laws mirror Proto-Indo-European societal structures. Blood feuds, patriarchal clans, ritual hospitality, all echoing the same principles found in Vedic India and early Italic tribes. Coincidence? Or survival of an ancient Indo-European moral code, preserved, not in temples or books, but in the spoken law of goat herders and mountain chiefs? That's why the genes survived. That's why the old haplogroups didn't disappear. Because in Albania, culture guarded the DNA, and geography guarded the culture. But even with this fortress of blood and memory, there's one force no mountain can block: the slow erosion of language. Because if the body was preserved in stone, what about the tongue? Didn't languages change everything? Yes and no. Because the real twist isn't what was spoken, it's what survived. Albanian, the language, is a ghost. It belongs to a family that no longer exists. A lone surviving branch of the once mighty Indo-European tree. Linguists call it an isolate because it has no siblings left alive. Not even one. And yet, it's Indo-European. Deeply. Structurally. Grammatically. It shares ancient DNA with languages like Latin, Greek, Sanskrit. But it split from them long before they even became empires. Likely over 4,000 years ago, during the Bronze Age fusion of steppe and Neolithic cultures. Here's the contradiction. We have almost no written Illyrian language, no sentences, no books. Just fragments. Tribal names. Place names. A few inscriptions. So how can we say Albanian descends from Illyrian? We can't. Not directly. But here's what we can say, scientifically. The people stayed. Their genes stayed. Their burial customs, laws, rituals stayed. We see cultural and genetic continuity, from Bronze Age tumuli to medieval villages to modern Albanians. And linguistically, the deeper you dig into Albanian, the older it feels. It holds fossilized words for axe, mountain, blood, brother, words untouched by Slavic or Latin influence. But layered over that root, loan words, lots of them. You can trace time through them. Latin from the Roman legions, Greek from trade and theology, Slavic from the migrations after 600 CE, Turkish from 5 centuries of Ottoman rule. Stacked like geological strata, but the core never shifts. Linguists like Eric Hamp and Georgiev spent decades comparing Albanian with reconstructed Illyrian, Thracian, Dacian. No proof, but too many echoes to ignore. And now genetic evidence confirms what the words can't say. The people stayed. Even if the tongue evolved, the soul stayed local. But it leads to a haunting question. If we don't know their words, can we still hear their voices? Yes. And some of the clearest echoes come from the Roman Empire. The Romans arrived in Illyria in 168 BCE, after the fall of King Gentius, the last Illyrian ruler. The cities were renamed, statues replaced, roads laid. But the people? They didn't vanish. Ancient DNA from Kenete and Steik, dating between 773 and 989 CE, tells us something stunning. 85% of their ancestry matches Bronze and Iron Age Albanians. The so-called Romanized population was biologically the same as their Illyrian ancestors. Only a small 15% admixture, mostly from Anatolian and Levantine sources, appears. Likely not from mass colonization, but from imperial troops and merchants flowing through the empire's veins. Not settlers, not invaders, transients. Even in the Roman heartlands, that level of genetic stability is rare. Apollonia, Butrint, Dyrrhachium, cities reshaped by Rome, reveal an archaeological contradiction. Latin inscriptions fill the stones, but the grave goods still speak Illyrian. Bronze torques, warrior-style daggers, Highland-style burials continue well into the 3rd century CE. And linguistic evidence agrees. Most personal and place names in the Central and Northern Balkans during Roman rule remained Paleo-Balkan. Epirus, Dardania, and Illyricum never fully Latinized. Not in voice, not in blood. Even the famed canon of Lake Ducagini, an oral law code preserved in the Highlands, holds fragments of pre-Roman clan justice systems, untouched by civil law. So while the Roman Empire changed everything, it didn't change them. They wore the empire like a coat, but beneath it, the ancestral blood stayed warm. Illyrians became Roman citizens, but they did not become Romans. Still, what Rome failed to erase, something else nearly shattered. Because after the legions withdrew, a wave was rising from the north. And it wasn't bringing culture. It was bringing collapse. And it had a name. The Slavic migrations. Between the 6th and 7th century CE, wave after wave of Slavic-speaking tribes moved south, through forests, over rivers, into the very heart of the Balkans. They didn't arrive with empires. They arrived with numbers. Settlements burned. Old roads crumbled. Roman rule faded into dust. And across the region, something strange happened. The languages changed. Greek became Slavic in Macedonia. Latin disappeared from Mysia. Thracian and Dacian gone completely. By the 9th century, the Balkans sounded different. But they didn't look different. Because here's the twist. Modern Albanians, the people closest to ancient Illyrians, carry only 9 to 16% Slavic ancestry, depending on the region. And that number? It doesn't even show up where you'd expect. Even men with Slavic Y-DNA haplogroups, like our 1A or I2A, often carry little to no autosomal Slavic DNA. What does that mean? It means the Y chromosome arrived, but the blood didn't follow. Likely absorbed. A few male lines. Not a population flood. A conquest on the map, not in the genome. Because while Slavic tribes renamed rivers, cities, and valleys, the people who lived there kept something deeper. Their identity. You can still see it today. Slavic toponyms sit beside ancient Illyrian ones. But the DNA, the burial rites, the Highland laws, They didn't change. The Glasenac, Maticumuli culture, still visible in early medieval graves. The canon, passed in whispers. The haplogroups J2b, L283, EV13, still strong in modern Albanian men. That's not Slavic. That's continuity. So if the land was conquered, but the blood stayed the same, then what are we really looking at? So who really changed? And who remained? To answer that, sometimes, we have to leave the Balkans behind, because a vital piece of Albanian identity didn't survive in the homeland. It survived in exile. In 1468, the death of Skanderbeg, Albania's last great defender against the Ottoman Empire, triggered a wave of mass migration. Over the next few decades, thousands of Albanians, warriors, priests, entire clans, crossed the Adriatic, settling in southern Italy. There, they became the Arborish, isolated in mountain villages of Calabria, Basilicata, and Sicily. They built stone houses, spoke an archaic form of Albanian, and refused to disappear. 5 centuries later, they still have it. Their genetic code remains a frozen mirror of 15th century Albania. Studies like D. Gaetano et al., 2009, and Capelli et al., 2005, confirm this. The Y-DNA haplogroups in Arborish males, including EV13, J2b, L283, R1b, Z2103, are nearly identical in frequency and structure to those in northern and central Albania today. But what's even more astonishing, their admixture is cleaner, because they left before the later Ottoman, Slavic, and modern migrations reshaped the gene pool. While Albanians back home absorbed new layers of ancestry, the Arborish preserved an older genetic snapshot, one that reflects medieval Illyrian continuity with stunning clarity. And it wasn't just DNA. They kept the Byzantine Christian rites, the canon-style clan ethics, oral epics sung in Arborish, a dialect untouched by modern influence, older than Standard Albanian itself. Even now, some Arborish villages ban intermarriage with outsiders, not from fear, but from duty, a quiet vow to preserve what exile once protected. And this creates an irony too deep to ignore. The most undiluted thread of Albanian genetic identity survived by leaving Albania. But DNA is only part of the story. What happens when science meets politics? It creates a battlefield where blood becomes a weapon. For over a century, the Illyrian theory has been more than history in Albania. It's been identity. It says the Albanians are the direct descendants of the Illyrians, the ancient people of the Western Balkans, and that this legacy gives them deep, ancestral rights to their land. From Shkodër to Kosovo, from Montenegro to Macedonia. It's not just pride. It's political ground. In the 20th century, under Enver Hoxha's regime, this theory became state policy. Schoolbooks, museums, even archaeology were reshaped to fit it. Everything pointed to Illyrian continuity. Everything outside that frame was erased. But then came the twist. Genetics. And it did something no historian could. It confirmed the story, but not the myth. Yes, Albanians show direct paternal links to Bronze and Iron Age Illyrians. J2b, L283, EV13, R1b, Z2103, all traceable from ancient graves in Sinimac, Shkrel, and Mat, into modern Albanian male lines. But the genome doesn't lie for ideology. It also shows admixture from Anatolian migrants during the Roman era, Slavic influence after the 7th century, and even Ottoman gene flow in the post-medieval period. Continuity, not purity. Survival, not isolation. The mtDNA lineages, the maternal side, add more complexity. Haplogroups like H12U5 and J1C reflect ancient Balkan roots, but also Neolithic and post-Roman blends. So where does that leave the Illyrian theory? Not destroyed, but humanized. Because identity isn't carved in stone. It's carried in bodies, shaped by war, migration, love, and loss. And that's the deeper paradox. Albanians may be one of Europe's oldest surviving peoples, but they are also one of its most evolving. Can a nation be ancient and still change? Can you carry the genes of warriors and still be made of ghosts? And what happens when science touches memory? Sometimes it awakens a library, not in stone, not in ink, but in blood. Because beneath the skin of every Albanian, lies something that Europe almost lost. A record. A living archive, not of rulers or wars, but of continuity. Inside the genome, science has found what no empire could preserve: the unbroken threads of identity, passed from mother to daughter, father to son, for 8,000 years. That's not metaphor. That's genetics. mDNA haplogroups like H1, U5, and J1C, inherited maternally, stretch back to Neolithic farmers from Anatolia, who brought wheat and goats to the Balkan hills around 6,500 BC. Y-DNA lineages like J2B, L283, and EV13, carried by warriors buried in tumuli between 1800 and 800 BCE, reappear today in rural men from Shkodra, Dibur, and Kosovo, almost unchanged. These aren't faded echoes. They're living inscriptions. Across Europe, cultural destruction came in waves: migrations, conversions, wars, colonization. Genetic layers piled like silt in a riverbed, until the past was unreadable. But in Albania, the sediment never fully settled. Something held it together: isolation, resilience, clan memory, mountain law, a refusal to be erased. That's why, when researchers from the Harvard Medical School, Lazaridis et al., 2022, and the Max Planck Institute compared ancient genomes to modern populations, Albanians stood out, not as pure, but as intact, more than most, like a single page of Europe's original book that never got rewritten. Not just Neolithic, not just Illyrian, but a layered story of resistance, fusion, survival. To be Albanian is to carry not one person, but many. To be a memory that never became a museum. To be the archive itself. But there's one last twist hidden in plain sight. Europe's origin story isn't buried. It's breathing. For decades, scientists thought the first Europeans had vanished, absorbed by waves of conquest, erased by time, replaced by newcomers. But ancient DNA says otherwise. The foundational genetic structure of Europe, the three core ancestral populations, is still here, still traceable, and most intact in one place: Albania. In 2018, Matheson et al. Published a massive study on European prehistoric genomes. Their findings were clear. Modern Albanians carry exceptionally high levels of ancestry from all three ancestral pillars of Europe. First, the Anatolian Neolithic farmers, who migrated into the Balkans around 6,500 BCE, bringing agriculture and early settlements. Their mitochondrial haplogroups, N1A-HJ, are still found in high frequency among Albanians today. Second, the Amnea steppe herders, who swept in from the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 3000 BCE, carrying with them the Indo-European language family, horse domestication, and the R1b and R1a haplogroups. Albanians, especially in the north, still carry R1b, Z2103, a rare subclade closely associated with Bronze Age steppe Balkan contact. Third, the local Balkan hunter-gatherers and warriors, whose legacy endures in haplogroups like J2b, L283, and EV13, especially strong in the central and northern Albanian gene pool. No other modern European population reflects that trifecta so clearly, and with such little admixture noise. And this changes everything, because the so-called first Europeans, the people who built megaliths, raised tumuli, and shaped the genetic bedrock of a continent, were never lost. They're not artifacts. They're alive. And their blood still pulses in the rivers of northern Albania, in the rituals of the arborish, in every genetic sample pulled from a modern highland village. So if the roots of Europe are still living, then it's time to ask, what happens when we test the DNA of those who claim to replace them?